Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. I am thrilled that you're joining me today. I'm even happier that I have the pleasure of interviewing Lauren LaRusso, who, if you haven't seen her on the internet, you're probably asleep and you probably don't have Instagram, because she's very prominent, does a phenomenal job of caring for really all parties involved in infidelity. So, Lauren, it's a joy. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's an honor. So I kind of like guests to share a little bit about themselves. I don't want to butcher your intro. So, I mean, you're obviously a very prominent personality. You're completing a book please talk about that. But for people that may not, because they are maybe not on Instagram, why don't you share just a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. I'm a psychotherapist by training. I'm a betrayed spouse by life experience. And those two things came together for me in a big way, which has essentially led to all of the work that I'm doing now. So my work, it's called Lauren LaRusso Coaching, and we help all parties in an affair better understand the experience and better understand themselves from the experience and help them move forward and heal. And what I find is that even though it's a little bit unorthodox to be working with all three sides, it's very important because it helps people expedite their healing when they can stop using the patterns of behavior, the patterns of thinking that are hurting themselves and other people. And that's what we know from affairs, is that it's one of the most hurtful, traumatizing experiences that anyone can go through. And it happens every day. And it is not talked about as openly as it's experienced and practiced. And my focus is to change that.
And you do a phenomenal job of it. On your website, you make it a point to say this is a very warm, safe, and judgment-free zone, because just the word infidelity causes people to cringe. And we have so many people who love to comment on Instagram posts and Facebook posts or what have you with malice and rage. But yet you talk about working with all three sides. Why don't you share a little bit more about that? Because to some, that might be controversial. To us, we understand that it's not. But how do you see that play out in your practice, if you will?
Yeah, it's a little bit similar to the idea of, restorative justice and other models where you're working with someone who is, I guess I would say the offender, or the party who is doing the harming, in order to help them repair those behaviors and work towards healing, and what we know from the research is that when we work with folks who are the perpetrator, I hate using that word, because it sounds very heavy, but, the person who has an affair is the perpetrator of infidelity. And when you work with the person who is perpetrating the harm, the hurt, the trauma, the betrayal, you transform the experience for everybody, because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is a relational trauma. And when you work with the source of it, not just the victim or survivor of it, you have the chance to change the way that entire dynamic goes, in the moment, in the experience itself, afterwards, the healing process, the communication process, the self-discovery process. And essentially, that's the best place where healing and growth and learning can come from for all sides. So if you have an unfaithful spouse who understands themselves better, instead of just going through the dark, woods of error, just really mucking things up, as so often happens, the betrayed spouse will experience less pain and harm and more clarity and more to work with. It doesn't mean they won't have pain, harm, and trauma. They absolutely will. That's not negotiable.
Right.
But the way that we can help heal all parts of the affair, it happens with each person who's involved. It doesn't happen. You can heal alone. Many people do. I healed alone. But it is more powerful, I think, when you have somebody who is the offending party who can step forward and do things differently and handle things differently. And in part, that did come from my own experience, because when I experienced it myself, it was such a roller coaster ride. And I felt like I was doing all of the work when I was the one who had been betrayed. And I find that very often with betrayed spouses. I run a community for betrayed spouses. And when I have my monthly coaching call with them, the theme is that everyone's turning themselves into a pretzel. And the person who was unfaithful is perhaps largely sitting there doing nothing, or so mired in shame that they can't even or don't even want to talk about it. And a lot of times those themes from the unfaithful are part of what got them into that affair in the first place.
Right.
And so working with all parties helps balance that imbalance that can keep people really siloed and stymie healing.
Absolutely. And you said this the other day on Instagram, and we talked about this off camera, but you talking about the myth that affairs only happen in unhappy marriages. It really struck a chord with the audience. So do you see that in your coaching and in the work that you do? I'm sure that you do, because it's a very common, well-known fact. But for those that are maybe trying to really sink their teeth into that, because so many betrayeds will say, well, if I was enough, he or she wouldn't have cheated. Clearly, there was a deficit, and I'm responsible for them acting out. And we know that that's not true.
It's part of the idea that you're supposed to keep your spouse happy, keep your marriage intact, and that somehow we are the keeper of the other person's choices. And the truth is, each person is an individual with free will and experiences that happen outside of the marital relationship. They go to work, they go to the coffee shop, they have friendships, they have a pickleball league, they have a tennis team. Life doesn't only happen at home. And in today's marriages, they are so pressurized. They're like a pressure cooker of, if only I'm amazing in all of the ways and I provide everything, we will be the epitome of success. And the truth is, it's so much more complex than that. And there is so much shame for a betrayed spouse, to your point, that they feel that if only they had done something better or different, their partner would not have strayed. But the question of, does it happen in happy marriages? All the time, every day. I mean, first of all, it depends on what you define as a happy marriage. And I would say, let's just define it as the good enough marriage. The good enough marriage is two flawed people who come together to create a couple, a family, where they are contributing towards a life together. They are communicating to the best of their abilities. They love each other. They care for each other. It's not mired with neglect, contempt, stonewalling, all of those things that would make up a marriage that has real vulnerabilities of dysfunction. There's two, good people with good intentions who enjoy family, friends, memories, vacations, everyday life. They're both involved to their different extents. It's about as good as it can be, given the waves that life will deal us.
Right.
And when it comes to affairs that happen in these marriages, they're for all of the other reasons that nobody talks about that affairs happen, which is, it doesn't mean something's wrong with the person or wrong with the marriage. It could be circumstantial. It could be, childhood wounds that just surface, in seeing yourself reflected and admired in the eyes of someone new. It doesn't mean you're not getting admiration at home. It could mean that it's just new admiration. And that's really, really appealing to you based on some of your own stuff. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you've got stuff like everybody else. It could simply be that you spend a lot of time with someone at work and you begin to share, and there's a new intimacy, a new vulnerability that grows. So I think it's important to recognize that different people will bring out and illuminate different parts of ourselves, because we are complex, and our partnership, the person that we choose to marry and forge a life with, they bring out and enhance certain parts of us. And then we might meet someone new, and we will come across new people who help us encounter ourselves in very different ways. That's why we have friendships, right? The person that we laugh with, the person that we run with, the person that we can tell our deepest, darkest secret to. Maybe they're not our spouse. Maybe they are. But we're not meant to only have a spousal relationship. And affairs can happen in all of those other places.
How do you help the betrayed that will oftentimes say, well, yeah, but Lauren, if he was getting everything he needed from me, he wouldn't have cheated. Or if she didn't really want someone else, she wouldn't have acted out. Like everything that you're saying is fine, but it's that the betrayed can't break out of the idea that somehow if they would have just done X, Y, or Z, their partner wouldn't have acted out.
Yeah. I mean, well, first of all, nobody makes somebody have an affair. Nobody makes somebody step out of a marriage by not checking all of the boxes. And I think that's a myth, that if somehow you check all of the marital boxes, you will be safe from this kind of harm. And that's why it blows so many betrayed spouses away. You know, there are some who say, okay, you know, I am traumatized and in pain, but I could see it because, you know, I turned down intimacy every chance I could get. I was preoccupied with the kids. I wasn't listening. I traveled for work and was so exhausted. I didn't, you know, listen to them when they came home. You know, that's really helpful and healing for them as well, because they can see where that vulnerability was. Still doesn't mean you caused it. Still doesn't mean it's your fault. Very different. So insight, explanation are not the same as agreement or excuse.
Wonderful.
Really important to do that separation within yourself and spend time there. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of things that are just out of our control. So if they were getting everything at home, maybe they still wanted more.
Yeah.
Maybe they wanted different. Maybe they wanted new. Life is very long. Marriage is very long. Life can get very boring. Life can get very monotonous. You know, human beings like novelty. They like mystery. They like interest. They like excitement. We're wired for that stuff. And it lights up parts of the brain that once that starts happening, you know, a betrayed spouse could be doing everything they can, and it can be largely misplaced. I also want to say, you know, sometimes with affairs, there are personality issues at play, especially, you know, narcissism and antagonistic personality types and avoidant attachment styles and avoidant relationship styles. And so again, as a betrayed spouse, you could have been wonderful and done everything, and it wouldn't have mattered, because that person has perhaps some strong narcissistic tendencies, some strong aspects of selfishness, some strong avoidant tendencies where they still wouldn't have communicated with you what it was they needed or wanted or longed for. Instead, they lean out instead of lean in. Right. Not your fault.
Yeah, I've said it for years, right? We can be 100% responsible for the status and the quality of marriage, meaning, and I said that wrong, we can be 50% responsible for the marriage, but the unfaithful party is 100% responsible for their affair and for acting out. But inevitably, you sharing that you were a betrayed comes to the point where they have to begin to ask themselves some questions when they are deciding, man, do I stay? Do I go? Do I give them a chance? Do I not give them a chance? And on Instagram, you had some reels that were really, really engaged with by so many people who are obviously contemplating that question or multiple questions. So from your practice and how you help so many, what are some of those questions that the betrayed really needs to be able to ask themselves before they decide?
Absolutely. And I want to always say every situation's unique. Every situation's different. You may wish you could leave and feel that you can't. Leaving may not be an option socioeconomically, culturally. Maybe it's not actually what's best for the kids. I mean, I think we live in a culture where we celebrate choosing ourselves over the, the little culture of family that we've built with somebody. And to be honest, in my work, I've found that those things really, really matter more in the end than people tend to estimate when they're going through these moments. And that's what trips people up, is realizing just how important the web that we've woven of connectedness and, family and identity, it really is a huge value for folks. So I just want to say, there is no shame in whatever you choose to do. And there's no easy.
Right.
It's choose your hard.
Yeah.
Choose your hard. But if you're a betrayed spouse, what I have found is that betrayed spouses who stay and their marriage survives are people who generally had really positive feelings about who their spouse is before they discover this affair. They believe very good things about their spouse, which makes it so much more painful, obviously, when this is revealed. But the tenderness, the warmth, the admiration, the cherishing of who they are as a person is there. But they're grappling with the thing that has been done and trying to figure out how to marry it with the person that they know their spouse to be. So questions that betrayed spouses can ask themselves are, has this happened before? If it's happened in the past, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. If it's happened in the past and it's happened now again, that's a pretty big red flag that there's something going on here.
Right.
What it is, we don't know, but there's something worth pausing around.
Yeah.
The other thing is this person humble about their behaviors? Are they showing remorse? And people say, well, what does that look like? What in my coaching calls, how do I know that they're genuinely sorry? They're showing it in more ways than just responding to you, forcing them to have conversations about the affair.
Or
right?
do anything for that matter.
You're laughing. Say more about why you're laughing.
Well, I'm laughing because a great friend of mine, I was in a co-joint session, and she is another therapist, and she did something that was phenomenal. She said, let me ask you, we'll just say Bob, how long was your affair? 2.5 years. Sally, we'll call her. How many text messages did you discover? Well, he was sending between 2,500 and 3,500 text messages every week to the affair partner. Did you go on any trips? Yeah, we went on some trips. And this brilliant therapist said, so you had all this time to text, over 3,000 texts a week, and you went on trips and you spent hours together, but you can't read a book. Yeah. You can't book a therapy session. You can't take a course. You can't do a workbook because you're so busy, but yet you weren't too busy to have a 2.5-year affair. And so us unfaithful can be really asses, and we can be really stubborn and obstinate because we're so busy that we can't do work, right?
That's wow. I'm laughing at that story because it's so accurate. It's almost scary. And that's extremely painful for a betrayed spouse. I remember, and this is part of what led me to write the book that I wrote, which is coming out January of 2026. It's called Beyond Infidelity, and it is a self-healing guide for betrayed spouses because the focus needs to be squarely on the betrayed spouses. And what I find is that the betrayed spouses turn into the healer, the tourniquet, I was writing a dissertation on affairs by the end of this because I was doing all the work. And
or the betrayed becomes the coddler because they have to coddle their unfaithful because they can't handle hard discussions or they can't handle doing counseling or therapy because of their shame. I'm making light of it because I was that guy 20 plus years ago. But at the end of the day, we had all this time to have an affair, but we can't find the time to do this kind of work. So you're hitting the nail right on the head.
Where does that come from? Like, I would love to just hear a little bit more because I know my scope through doing this work with folks every day, but I would love to hear, is it that you don't care enough and that's part of why you had the affair? Is it that the shame is stifling you? Is it something else? Can you tell us?
Oftentimes it's our shame and it's our lack of internal self-reference. Many times there is a parallel. Maybe we had angry moms or angry dads. And so when our partner, particularly in a dynamic where there's a male unfaithful and a betrayed female, the betrayed's emotions are overwhelming. And at some level, our narcissism kicks in because they're not providing us our supply. We need that narcissistic supply to feel okay. What I'll say in session all the time is, I need my spouse to be okay so that I'm okay, which is such a testimony to our lack of internal self-reference to be able to show up for our partner So why can't they have big emotions? Why can't they get upset? That doesn't mean you have to fix it. But if every time they get upset, you fall apart or you shame them or you condemn them or you try and box them in, what does that say about our ability to show up for them? And so we are stubborn. There's an old saying, I know that you know it because everybody in the field knows it, but I struggle to remember who said it, but there is a thought that says when someone is refusing to get help, oftentimes it's they know what they are doing is wrong and they don't want to be called on it. It's not an absolute, but it is common. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's a really unfair position for betrayed spouses to be in, to not only be betrayed and bleeding out from the pain of that, but then also to be tasked with finding the therapist, reading the books, offering the books, I was copying, highlighting, asking to have a weekly book club, asking to have conversations. It was pathetic at the end of the day, but I was begging this person to do the work that I knew we would need to do if we were ever going to get on the other side of the magnitude of what had just transgressed. And we didn't, because one person doesn't save a marriage.
A great buddy of mine, James Anir, we have another podcast together. He says it this way, and I stole it from him and I love it. And he will say, unless an unfaithful can eventually come to the point where they display relational leadership, there can be no substantial healing. And relational leadership is not us unfaithful going, I'm in charge, because anytime the unfaithful is in charge of what recovery looks like, we have a problem. But relational leadership is, hey, I was watching this podcast, honey. Hey, I was reading this book, honey. Hey, I was doing this workbook and I saw this and this really meant something to me. What does it mean to you? Hey, would you like to go for a walk? Hey, would you like to go on a date? Hey, would you like to do this session with Sam or with Lauren? Hey, what do you think about getting help or doing an intensive? Without relational leadership, and they're doomed. And I would have to believe that relational leadership to the betrayed is one of the telltale signs that perhaps there could be restoration available. Would you agree?
100%. That is all a betrayed spouse is looking for. And unfortunately, it's what so often doesn't happen. It is the lifeline for a betrayed spouse. They're dying for it.
Yeah.
They're just dying for it. And it doesn't take a lot to walk up to your spouse and say, how are you doing today? I just want to let you know I've been thinking about you. It's little stuff, but they don't want to open the door for the conversation that they don't want to have. So there's a lot of reasons that healing doesn't happen, but it absolutely requires the perpetrator to be the healer. If there's going to be real forgiveness, because that word gets thrown around, the perpetrator of the harm must become the healer and repair not only their behaviors, but help generate better and new so that you're not doing the same old thing. You've created more intimacy and connection because of the harm that's been caused. And if it's just going to be acceptance, which is what I find more commonly the outcome of infidelity, accepting that it happened, not forgiveness, it didn't have that repair. Unfortunately.
Well, and let me ask you this. This is something that I have been telling people probably the last 10 years because there was such a shift both in the faith community and for lack of better terminology, agnostic. And I was a big part of the faith community, but this never resonated with me. There is this rush to forgive when in fact we can only forgive what we are cognizant of. And we don't early on even know how deep the layers go of betrayal trauma and PTSD, complex PTSD. And so I have been telling people for quite some time, listen, let's worry about forgiveness later. How about we work on grief? How about we process through grief? Because I also say it this way, all rage and betrayal trauma is duct taped to grief.
Absolutely.
And I meet some really angry betrayeds, male and female. And I work with a lot of them. But eventually I have to tell them, listen, you're raging and I get it, but you're really full of grief. And maybe this is what was displayed to you in childhood. But as much as you're raging, your heart is broken. I mean, is that what you see?
It's grief and trauma. It's grief and trauma. And all that rage is dysregulation as well. And oftentimes it's pointed to as, well, you know, because you're behaving this way, I can't feel safe enough to step forward and have conversations with you. Be braver. Be braver.
Oof, be an adult. How about just be an adult? You had the nerve to have an affair. How about having some nerve to show up for your angry betrayed?
The issue is, I believe that unless it happens to you, you cannot truly comprehend the depth of what it does to a person. The nervous system dysregulation, the magnitude of the complex grief. You're grieving for your past. You're grieving for your present. You're grieving for the future that is now completely called into question. And it's like your spouse has died, but they're still standing there right in front of you, probably feeling even better than ever before because they had this whole experience that they're not super sad that they're not super sad happened. They're sad that they hurt you. They're upset that it, I don't want to say they're upset it got discovered because I don't think that's really fair. I think a lot of folks do feel a lot of shame and anxiety over it while it's happening and dissonance around it. That really depends. But it's a grief and a trauma that stays with you your entire life. And I do not think that you can really understand it unless it has happened to you. And Absolutely. So it's that humility of putting yourself aside and letting your spouse be dysregulated, have those feelings, and just staying steady and accepting them. You know, it doesn't mean you need to tolerate abuse. Of course not.
Right.
But the grief and the trauma is highly dysregulating.
You know, and I know that you see this because you have a just rock star practice, but I would agree with you 1,000%. I have so many people that come to me who have been mishandled by people who've never been through it before. And so as we're kind of winding down, I mean, you've been such a great breath of fresh air and you've hit the nail right on the head. And you clearly, from both your social media as well as just listening to you, have your finger on the pulse for what people are going through. But I remember 20 plus years ago, I was in the middle of a field and really suicidal, and I had lost everybody. I was a public personality and my failure was quite prominent, and I knew nobody that could relate to me. I knew nobody that had been through what I had been through. So, you know, to the person that's out there in their own field, betrayed or unfaithful, to the woman or the man who's a betrayed sitting here going, how can I ever smile again, live again, find purpose again? How do I go forward? I would just invite you, what would you say to them as they're listening or watching, trying to find hope to just keep going?
Absolutely. First of all, that experience is all too common, and the aloneness, the isolation of it for all parties is a huge part of why this work is so important, because it brings all parties to the brink of despair and losing your mind, absolutely coming unraveled. And if you can shift your mindset to the idea that everything that's happening is happening for you, for some reason that you may not know yet, but that if you work to lean in to where it hurts, to where you're confused, to where you keep doing the same thing over and over again and wishing that things were different, if you can lean in to all those places, you're going to find the work. You're going to find what's being handed to you as the portal to a new version of yourself. I think that healing comes through generativity. And human beings have a remarkable capacity and ability to generate hope from despair. And they do that by making meaning out of what happened.
Yeah.
And meaning making is hugely important. So whether you're an affair partner, whether you're unfaithful, whether you're betrayed, stay the course of personal healing, of your own healing. And it's that Rumi quote, the wound is the place where the light enters you.
Yeah.
Right? Ask yourself, where is this wound trying to illuminate something deeper for me. And it may not come by easily and it may not come quick enough.
Yeah.
But don't be afraid to do the work. I mean, I remember when I was going through it, it felt like I'm Googling, I'm on Amazon, and it really was challenging to find. I didn't use social media for information at that point. This was almost a decade ago. And I know on social media now there is so much. You have to be really careful about the pop psychology aspect of it. It's a salad bar. Take what, works, leave the rest. There is no one size fits all. And you have to be really careful about that. But there's more resources than ever. Use them. Get the books. Listen to the podcasts. Talk to a therapist. Don't stay isolated, because that isolation is a huge part of the problem. And the spoiler alert is that you will be okay. No matter what, you will.
It's wonderful. So if people want to work with you, if they want to read more articles, watch your podcast, join a coaching group, if they want to find you, how do they find out more about you?
Go to LaurenLaRusso.com. That's my website. Or you can go to Instagram at Lauren LaRusso. Those are the two places where everything really is centrally located. And I would just be so pleased. I also have, it's a year-long email campaign called Fidelity Factors, Why We Stray and What to Do About It. And every week is a new underlying reason that infidelity happens or that someone might stray and cheat. And it then provides some tangible, practical advice for healing that part of yourself. You can go sign up for that on my website so you get that to your inbox every week. And I hope by healing and by learning and by growing, we can just start to change the nature of this beast.
It's a one day at a time journey. So once again, thank you for tuning in. I'm so grateful for you, Lauren, just sharing your heart, but dropping just bombs of practical application that both the unfaithful and the betrayed can use, because really there's so much opportunity to do work. Everybody blows me up all the time. What's the work? What's the work? It's what you're not doing. Because if you're having to ask me what the work is, it's probably apparent you're not doing the work. And that's why you need an expert like Lauren or myself or so many other wonderful guides and helpers that are out there. But if I can help you, you can reach out to me at samshealingpodcast@gmail.com, and we will see you next time on Sam's Healing Podcast.